Can a 12-year-old girl really save a plane from crashing? A 12-year-old girl saved a plane from crashing when both pilots passed out midair. 24 hours later, she received a shocking invitation from the president. What she did while flying the plane left everyone in deep shock. The morning in France was beautiful as usual, painted with soft lavender skies and the gentle hum of a waking city. It was the final day of the field trip, a week that had felt like magic, stitched together with baguettes, museums, Eiffel Tower selfies, and the kind of laughter that only middle school friendships can produce. 12-year-old Ava Martinez stood quietly near the window of the hotel lobby, her sketchbook tucked under one arm. She barely spoke during the morning flurry of activity. While the other students scrambled to stuff souvenirs and crumpled clothes into overstuffed suitcases, Ava simply zipped up her neat little bag, her eyes always drifting skyward. But what secret knowledge did Ava hold that could change everything? She was excited, though not for the same reasons as her classmates. Most of them couldn't wait to show off their trinkets or tell exaggerated stories to their friends back home in Los Angeles. Ava, she just wanted to be at the airport. Airports were her wonderlands. They held the promise of takeoffs, landings, engines roaring like thunder, and the dream of flight made real. She didn't just love airplanes, she understood them. While others marveled at the view from the windows, Ava could tell you the difference between a turbofan and a turbojet engine and why winglets matter at high altitudes. Her fascination was quiet, often unnoticed, except by a few teachers who had caught glimpses of her sketching intricate jet engine parts during lunch breaks. As the students boarded the bus bound for Charles de Gaulle Airport, Ava clutched her sketchbook tight. She'd drawn something the night before, a cross-section of a Boeing 777's G90 engine, annotated in pencil. She wasn't sure what made her draw it, just a hunch, maybe, but it felt important, like something she had to understand before they flew home. Their chaperones, Mr. Jacobs and Ms. Rivera, took a final head count, then waved goodbye to the friendly hotel concierge. The students buzzed with energy, joking, comparing last-minute purchases, and trying to sneak in Wi-Fi for one last TikTok post. But Ava, seated by the window of the bus, barely noticed the chatter. She was focused on the sky again, watching the contrails of early morning flights carving delicate streaks across the clouds. At the airport, the excitement amplified. The group navigated through check-in, security, and duty-free shops. Ava hung back, walking slowly, soaking in every engine hum and boarding announcement. When she reached their gate, Flight 462 to LAX, she leaned against the glass and stared at the aircraft parked outside. It was massive, sleek, powerful, a Boeing 777, just like in her sketches. As the minutes ticked by, something inside her stirred, not fear, she loved flying too much for that. It was something else, a pressure, a thought half-formed. She glanced at her notebook again and traced the sketch with her fingertip. Something about the configuration looked off. But then Ms. Rivera called out, "All right, kids. Time to board." And the moment passed like a breeze. There was a strange kind of peace that came with flying at 36,000 feet. The engines hummed in the background like white noise. The overhead air vents whispered cool breaths, and the cabin lights were dimmed to a soft glow. Passengers on Flight 294, bound from New York to Lisbon, had settled into the rhythm of a long-haul journey. Some had tucked themselves under scratchy blue airline blankets, heads bobbing with sleep, while others tapped lazily at seatback screens or sipped quietly on small plastic cups of soda and juice. It was the kind of calm that only existed above the clouds, miles away from earthly noise, floating in the in-between. Hours into the flight, nothing felt out of the ordinary. The fasten seatbelt sign had been off for a while, and the cabin crew had completed their rounds. Passengers occasionally murmured requests or stretched their legs, and flight attendants rolled carts of drinks back into the galley. No one suspected a thing. No one imagined that behind the sealed cockpit door, something terrible had just begun. Captain Everett had been flying for nearly 25 years, a quiet, steady man with a fondness for crossword puzzles and classical music. He had thousands of hours of flight time and a reputation for being unflappable. But now, in the cockpit, he was slumped forward, unmoving, his headset dangling slightly off his head, mouth slack, eyes closed. First Officer Ramirez turned to him, confused at first. "Captain," he asked, no response. He leaned closer. "Everett?" He reached out, gently shaking the older man's arm, still nothing. Panic began to rise in his throat. Ramirez activated the autopilot with practiced fingers, then hit the intercom button for the cabin crew. "We need medical assistance in the cockpit," he said, trying to keep his voice level. The call echoed through the cabin. Most passengers barely noticed, assuming someone had gotten airsick, but 2 seats back in row 17, a paramedic named Jordan Connors perked up. He looked at his wife, nodded once, and stood. A few rows behind him, a retired ER nurse, Elaine Foster, had already unbuckled her seatbelt. They met eyes and moved forward together, led by a pale flight attendant who opened the cockpit door with a key code. Inside the cockpit, the air felt strangely thin. Captain Everett was clearly unconscious, his breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible. Jordan dropped to his knees, checking for a pulse. Elaine grabbed the emergency oxygen mask from overhead and strapped it to the captain's face. "Help me move him," Jordan said, voice tight. "We need to start compressions." As the two worked quickly, Ramirez tried to keep calm, speaking to air traffic control. His words were slurred. The panel lights blurred together. He rubbed his temples, then his eyes, blinking rapidly. Something was wrong, very wrong. His limbs felt heavy, like they were wrapped in lead. He reached for the oxygen mask, his fingers missed it. Then, just like that, Ramirez collapsed, his head hitting the console with a dull thud before sliding to the floor. For a beat, time stopped. Jordan and Elaine froze. "Oh God," she whispered. "Not him, too." They tried everything, both pilots were unconscious. The oxygen mask didn't help. The emergency tank didn't help. CPR, adrenaline, nothing worked. The paramedic's brow furrowed as he scanned the cockpit systems. Then he saw it, a small red warning light glowing steadily. "Cockpit oxygen system failure," he read aloud. Elaine's eyes widened. "That's why they're both down, they didn't even know it was happening." Jordan stood up, wiping sweat from his brow. "We need to get air in here. Get the door open, circulate cabin oxygen, maybe that helps, but they're not waking up." Back in the cabin, the intercom crackled again, this time, it was the voice of flight attendant Emily Reyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice trembling, "this is an urgent announcement. Both of our flight crew members are currently unresponsive. We have medical professionals attending to them." A ripple of shock passed through the cabin. "They're not flying the plane," someone asked loudly. Emily continued, trying to calm the storm before it truly began. "We are in contact with ground control. We ask that everyone remain seated, please do not panic. We will update you as soon as we can." But panic was already blooming. A man stood up, demanding answers. A woman clutched her rosary and began to pray. Children cried. A teenage boy fumbled with his phone, trying to send a message. A businessman pulled out his laptop, his fingers shaking too hard to type. "No one's flying the plane," a woman asked in disbelief. "What do you mean, no one?" Emily held the intercom button with both hands, her knuckles white. "If there is anyone on board with flight experience, military, commercial, private, please make yourself known to the crew immediately." For a moment, silence. Then a small voice rose from row 9. I play flight simulators." Heads turned. A girl 12 years old, skinny, with braids and a hoodie, stood up. Her name was Ava. Emily hesitated. "Sweetheart, do you mean games?" Ava nodded but held her ground. "Flight simulators, real ones. My uncle works in aviation, he taught me everything. I've logged hundreds of hours. I know how planes fly. I know the controls. I might not be a pilot, but I think I can help." There was laughter, nervous, reflexive, but Ava didn't flinch. Jordan, standing near the cockpit, looked over. "Let her through," he said. At this point, any help is help. Emily bent down to Ava's level. "Do you really think you can understand what's in there?" "I don't know," Ava said honestly, "but I want to try." Moments later, Ava stepped into the cockpit. The sight of the unconscious pilots didn't even shake her. She took a deep breath and slid into the co-pilot's chair. Her small hands hovered over the yoke. "Okay," she whispered, "let's figure this out." Jordan handed her the headset, pushed the button to talk. Ava pressed it. "Hello, this is Ava. I'm 12. I'm not a real pilot, but I know simulators. I need help flying this plane." There was a stunned pause. Then a calm voice responded, "Ava, this is air traffic control. You're doing just fine. We're going to help you every step of the way. What you're doing is very brave." Ava's fingers danced lightly over the panel. "I see we're on autopilot, heading 340, altitude is 36,000. That's exactly right, Ava, you're doing great." Passengers sat frozen, listening to every word. A child was flying the plane. "She's just a kid," someone whispered. "She might be our only chance," came the reply. Back in the cockpit, Ava focused. "What's our fuel situation?" "Enough to reach the Azores, we're rerouting you there. That's the nearest airstrip." "Okay," she said, nodding. "Tell me what to do when it's time to descend." For the next hour, Ava remained at the controls, following instructions, keeping the nose level, adjusting small things as guided. "You still with me, Ava?" the voice asked. "Still here," she said, jaw tight. "Just concentrating." Jordan placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're doing something amazing." Ava didn't answer, she was too focused. Her heart pounded, but her mind was clear. Behind her, the paramedics monitored the pilots, still unconscious. Elaine shook her head. "No change." Ava checked the altimeter again. "I'm ready to descend when you are." "Start now," said the controller. "Throttle back gently, lower to 25,000, slow and steady." Ava exhaled and began the descent. The aircraft responded like it had been waiting for her. The engine softened. The nose dipped. In the cabin, people clutched their seats. One man began to cry, not from fear, but from the realization that a child was doing what adults could not. "Flaps?" Ava asked. "Not yet, just focus on your glide path." She followed every instruction, eyes bouncing between instruments and the horizon. "Landing gear down," said the voice. Ava reached for the switch, click. The plane shuddered slightly. "You're lined up with the runway, keep it steady." The lights of the airstrip blinked through the windshield. "Final descent, Ava, pull back just a bit." The wheels touched down, hard, but clean. The cabin erupted in gasps. The plane bounced once, then rolled smoothly down the runway. Ava cut the throttle. "You did it," the voice said in her ear, full of emotion. "Ava, you landed the plane." Silence filled the cabin. Then cheers, loud and joyful, broke out. People clapped, sobbed, hugged each other. Ava sat back in the seat, her hands trembling now. She looked over at Jordan. "I was really scared," she whispered. He smiled. "You didn't show it." And for the rest of her life, Ava would carry the memory of that night, of the moment when the world seemed to fall apart at 36,000 feet, and she was the one who kept it in the sky. The news broke like wildfire. It started with a single alert, just one headline blinking across phones in airports and living rooms: 12-year-old girl lands passenger plane after pilots collapse. Within minutes, it was everywhere. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, Fox, and countless others all rolled out their versions. The words differed slightly, but the message was the same: a child had saved 200 people from certain death thousands of feet in the air. The name in every headline: Ava. By mid-morning, the world had fallen in love with her. Footage of the emergency landing played on loop across networks. Blurry cell phone videos from the cabin caught the rising panic as the intercom crackled, the stunned silence when Ava's voice came through, and the roar of relief after touchdown. The story spread fast, and so did the awe. "Student hero lands plane," read the Washington Post. "12-year-old saves 200 lives," echoed the Times. She was trending on every social media platform: #Ava the pilot, #Our hero Ava, #Flight 294 miracle. In her quiet Los Angeles neighborhood, things were anything but quiet now. News vans began arriving before dawn. They parked along the curb like satellites orbiting her small blue and white house. Giant satellite dishes rotated on van roofs, and long camera lenses pointed toward her front door. Reporters whispered into microphones, while others tried, politely at first, to knock on the door or flag down her parents for comments. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Some brought coffee or breakfast to Ava's mother, Sarah, just to be kind. Others came by to say how proud they were to live on the same block. But inside, Ava was overwhelmed. She sat on the living room couch in sweatpants, knees tucked to her chest, her head resting on her mom's shoulder. The TV was off, the curtains drawn, but she knew she could feel the world was looking at her. "Why do they care so much?" she asked softly. Her father, Marcus, looked up from his phone. "Because what you did, honey. People don't expect a kid to save lives, especially not in the sky." "But I didn't want attention," Ava whispered. "I just wanted to help." "We know," Sarah said gently, kissing her forehead. "And that's what makes you special." The doorbell rang again, another bouquet of flowers from someone who'd seen the news, another box of chocolates, a handmade card from a classroom in Chicago. A teddy bear wearing pilot goggles arrived with a note for Captain Ava. Ava smiled at that one. At school, things were no less intense. Her middle school held a special assembly the day after she returned. They called it a celebration of courage. A stage was set up in the gym, and every student, teacher, custodian, and staff member crowded in. Banners reading "Welcome Home, Ava" and "Our Hero" hung on the walls. The principal cried during her speech, so did two of Ava's teachers. When Ava was asked to speak, she stood behind the microphone, heart pounding. I didn't do it alone," she began. "I had help from the air traffic controllers, from the paramedics, from the people who believed in me. I just didn't want anyone to die." The crowd erupted in applause. But later, when her friends asked if she'd seen herself on YouTube or TikTok, Ava shook her head. She hadn't watched the landing, hadn't read the articles. She didn't like the sound of her voice played back or the way people described her like a superhero. It didn't feel right. She was just a kid who had done what she could when no one else could. And then came the envelope. It was a Friday afternoon when it happened. The street was unusually quiet for once. The reporters had gone for now. Ava was in her room, sketching a drawing of a cockpit, her pencils arranged neatly beside her. The house smelled like dinner, garlic and butter and something baking. Ava had seen the White House before, on television, in textbooks, even on the back of coins. But seeing it in real life was like walking into a painting. The plane had landed in Washington, D.C., just after sunrise. The air was brisk, the kind of morning that wakes your senses. As soon as the family stepped off the private jet sent by the federal government, they were greeted by two black SUVs and a sharply dressed protocol officer who introduced himself only as Jackson. "No need to worry about anything today," he said warmly. "You just need to be Ava. We've taken care of the rest." Ava clutched the gold-trimmed envelope again. It hadn't left her hand since that day on the porch. It was creased now, a little worn at the corners, but it had become her talisman, her proof that all of this was real. The city rolled past them like a dream, rows of cherry trees, flags fluttering from every building, monuments she'd only seen in documentaries. She didn't speak much, just stared out the window in silence as the SUV turned onto Pennsylvania Avenue. And then, there it was, the White House, perfect and white as bone, flanked by deep green lawns and guards in dark suits with earpieces. A line of reporters stood behind metal barriers, their cameras already flashing. Some of them shouted her name, others just held signs, "Welcome Ava, our hero," and one with "From the Sky to History" in bold red letters. Her father took her hand. He'd worn his best suit, though he kept fidgeting with the tie. Her mom was in a navy blue dress, a little too tight because she hadn't had time to shop. Even her little brother, Mateo, had slicked his hair back, trying to act serious. But all eyes were on Ava. A White House aide met them at the entrance and led them inside. As they walked through the corridors, ornate, carpeted, filled with portraits of presidents, Ava's footsteps grew quieter. She passed busts of Abraham Lincoln and Eleanor Roosevelt, saw the famous painting of George Washington. It all felt so impossibly large, like a place she was visiting in a dream she wasn't supposed to be in. Then the aide turned to her with a smile. "He's ready for you." the doors to the Oval Office opened. It was smaller than she'd imagined, but impossibly grand at the same time. The rug was deep blue with stars in a circle. Behind the desk stood the President of the United States. He wasn't like he was on TV, he looked taller, kinder. As soon as she walked in, he stepped forward with his hand outstretched and a genuine smile. "Ava Martinez," he said, his voice strong and warm, "the girl who flew a plane. It is an honor to meet you." Ava hesitated, then shook his hand, her own was trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. He knelt a little, so his eyes were level with hers. "You were brave. You were calm. You saved 200 lives. You didn't just act like a hero, you are one." Behind her, the cameras clicked like a hailstorm, but Ava didn't hear them, her ears were ringing with disbelief. She was invited to sit, so was her family. The president spoke to them like they were old friends, asking about their flight, about Mateo's favorite subject in school, even about Ava's cat. But the tone shifted when an aide stepped forward and handed him a small, velvet-lined box. "Ava," the president said, rising again, "the nation owes you more than gratitude, we owe you recognition, and more importantly, we owe you opportunity." He opened the box, inside was a medal, round, gold, and shining under the lights. A blue ribbon stretched from either side. The president read from a card, "For bravery in the face of crisis, for composure under unimaginable pressure, and for saving the lives of 200 souls at just 12 years of age, Ava Martinez is hereby awarded the National Medal of Honor for Civilian Valor, the highest recognition a civilian may receive from the United States of America." Gasps rippled across the room. A military officer stepped forward and placed the medal around her neck. It was heavy, heavier than she thought it would be. As it settled on her shoulders, she glanced at her parents. Her mother was crying silently, her father had his hand over his mouth, Mateo clapped even though no one else was yet. But the moment wasn't over. The president stepped toward the podium, the cameras turned, the broadcast went live. "My fellow Americans," he said, addressing the nation, "today, we honor not just courage, but potential. Ava Martinez showed the world what it means to rise above fear, to act with heart and mind under extreme pressure. She reminded us that heroism has no age, no uniform, and no limits." He paused, looked at Ava. "And so, it is my great privilege to announce that the United States government will grant Ava Martinez a reward of $40 million for her act of bravery." The room burst into noise, gasps, claps, more flashes. Ava sat frozen, $40 million. She turned to her parents, her mom had dropped into her seat, openly weeping now, her father looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. The president continued, calm and proud, "This reward is more than just a number, it is an investment in a future that Ava helped protect. It is a promise that her life will not be limited by circumstance or finance." He held up a second envelope. "Additionally, Ava is being awarded a full academic scholarship to any institution of her choice, anywhere in the world, from Harvard to NASA's flight school, wherever her dreams take her, she will be supported by the gratitude of a nation." A standing ovation erupted from the small group of officials and press allowed in the room. Ava stood slowly, not because anyone asked her to, but because she felt it in her bones. The president extended the scholarship envelope, she reached out and took it with both hands. And then something strange happened. For the first time since the flight, since the cockpit, the screaming passengers, the landing gear that groaned like metal thunder, Ava felt calm. She looked around the Oval Office, at the president, at the faces watching her with awe, at the cameras capturing her every breath, and she realized this was not the end of her story. This was just the beginning. That night, Ava lay in a four-poster bed in the Lincoln bedroom. The walls were covered in antique wallpaper, history echoed in every creak of the floorboards. She clutched the envelope again, the scholarship, the medal still around her neck. Her parents slept nearby, exhausted. In the guest quarters, Mateo snored on a velvet couch. But Ava was wide awake. She stared at the ceiling, thinking not about the money, not even about the president, but about the people on that flight, the crying baby, the elderly man who held his wife's hand, the couple on their honeymoon who wrote her afterward to say thank you. And she whispered to herself, "I did something good." She didn't know what came next. Would she become a pilot, an astronaut, a doctor? All she knew was this: she had been given a future, and she would spend the rest of her life earning it. Because sometimes heroes don't wear capes, sometimes they wear pajamas with a medal hanging from their neck, and sometimes they're only 12. Ava Martinez had never imagined that one moment, one decision, would change her entire life. But in the months following the dramatic events aboard Flight 462, that was exactly what had happened. Gone were the quiet mornings in her sunlit Los Angeles bedroom, filled with books and model airplanes. In their place came TV appearances, interviews, invitations, and headlines that followed her from continent to continent. She had been called a miracle, a prodigy, a national treasure. But to her parents, she was still just Ava, the girl who left her toast half-eaten because she got distracted by clouds, the girl who used to line up her dolls as airplane passengers and fly them using an old hairdryer as an engine, the girl who, when she was 5, once declared at dinner that she was going to land a plane one day. No one believed her until she actually did. It started with letters, thousands of them. Piles of envelopes stacked high on the dining room table, spilling onto the kitchen counters. Some were from passengers whose lives she had saved, others came from children who said they wanted to be like her. Many were in languages Ava couldn't read, but she understood their message in full: hope, admiration, and something close to wonder. Then came the speaking requests. The first was the International Aviation Summit in London, an exclusive event where pilots, engineers, and airline executives gathered to talk about the future of flight. And now, they wanted a 12-year-old girl at the podium. Ava was nervous as she stood backstage waiting for her name to be called, her hands trembled. Her mom stood beside her, squeezing her shoulder gently. "Just speak from the heart," she whispered. When Ava walked onto the stage, the spotlight hit her face like the sun through a cockpit window. Hundreds of eyes stared back at her, but she didn't flinch. "I'm not here because I planned for any of this," she said into the microphone. "I was scared, I was just a kid on a plane. But when everything went wrong, I remembered what I'd practiced on my flight simulator at home. I remembered that people needed help. So, I sat down, took the controls, and tried to do what I knew." There was silence, and then thunderous applause. That moment changed everything. Invitations poured in from Brazil, Japan, Italy, and Canada. People wanted to hear Ava speak. Aviation companies gave her private tours. Universities, even Ivy League ones, wrote her letters expressing their excitement about her future. Reporters followed her from airports to hotel lobbies. The President of the United States had already recognized her, awarded her with a National Medal of Honor, and granted her a $40 million reward along with a full academic scholarship to any institution of her choice. But Ava never let it get to her head. She still packed her own bag, still stayed up late drawing blueprints for her dream airplane, still called her grandma every Sunday, even if she was halfway around the world. Her book, Sky in Her Hands, began on a notepad by her bed. She would write late into the night, scribbling moments from the flight, the fear she felt, the images burned into her memory. But the book wasn't just about the emergency, it was about what came after, the dream she had before the flight, the ordinary days that had shaped her, and the message she now wanted to pass on. You don't have to be older, stronger, or taller to do something brave, you just have to believe it's possible. Publishers scrambled for a chance to print it, but Ava insisted on writing it her way. No ghostwriters, no big edits, just her voice telling her story the way it had happened, honest, real. Despite the fame, Ava wanted a taste of her old life. So, one spring morning, she told her parents something surprising. "I want to visit my old school," she said over breakfast, "just for a day." Her mom looked up from her coffee. "You sure?" Ava nodded. "I miss it, I miss them." That Friday, she wore sneakers, jeans, and a simple hoodie, no designer clothes, no entourage, just Ava with a backpack slung over her shoulder and a quiet determination in her step. As she walked through the school gates, whispers turned into cheers, students swarmed her, hugging her, asking questions. Her old teacher, Mr. Daniels, stood stunned in the doorway of room 14. "Ava," he said, blinking like he was seeing a dream, "you came back." "I said I would." Inside the classroom, her desk still had her name etched in the wood, faintly. The other kids gave her space, but their eyes sparkled with curiosity. Mr. Daniels called for attention. "Class, today we have someone very special with us. You know her story, you've seen her on the news, but remember, she was sitting in this classroom not long ago, she was one of you." Ava stood up. "I wasn't the smartest," she said, "I wasn't the bravest, but I loved learning, I loved planes. And when the moment came, I remembered what I knew, that was enough. So learn everything, love it, because one day, it might matter more than you think. A hand shot up in the back. Were you scared? Terrified, Ava replied, but I didn't let fear stop me. That's the only difference between bravery and panic. What you do next? After the bell rang, her classmates didn't scatter, they stayed by her side, sharing their dreams. One wanted to be a firefighter, another a scientist. A girl said she wanted to be a pilot, too. You can, Ava told her, I believe that. Later, as the sun dipped low, Ava walked to the playground where she used to play tag and pretend the jungle gym was an airplane wing. She looked up at the sky, a plane soared high above, its trail a thin white line across the blue. She stared at it, eyes wide, a soft smile forming on her lips. The sky didn't seem distant anymore, it felt close, personal, familiar. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, another invitation, this one from an aerospace engineering program, asking her to tour their research facility. She looked at it briefly, then pocketed the phone. The future could wait. Right now, she just wanted to be 12. The wind rustled her hair, laughter echoed behind her, the bell rang. Students ran past, some waving, others simply looking at her in awe. Ava stood still, just a girl, but also more, a symbol of what happens when an ordinary person does something extraordinary. The headlines might eventually fade, the cameras would leave, but for every passenger she saved, for every kid she inspired, for every adult reminded of the courage inside us all, Ava Martinez would remain unforgettable. As the last light of the day brushed gold across the rooftops, Ava looked to the horizon with calm eyes and a quiet strength. She had flown a plane when no one else could, she had saved 200 lives, she had stood before the President of the United States, and now she stood before her peers, reminding them that heroes come in all sizes. She wasn't done dreaming, but more than that, she wasn't done inspiring. The sky had once been a dream, now, it was just the beginning. If you enjoyed the story about Ava Martinez and her incredible journey from an ordinary 12-year-old girl to a global inspiration, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Black Struggles for more powerful stories like this one. Your support helps us bring you more content that uplifts and inspires. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you feel about Ava's story and how it all ended? From the moment she took control of the flight to the emotional ceremony at the White House with the president, to her return to Mr. Daniels' classroom and that final moment of reflection, what stood out most to you? Drop your rating of the story on a scale of 1 to 10 in the comments. Be honest, how powerful was this story for you? Also, let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel, just like Ava herself, who went from her hometown in Los Angeles to the grand halls of Washington, D.C., and beyond. We're looking forward to reading your thoughts and seeing your ratings in the comments. Thanks for watching, and remember, you never know when life will ask you to be brave.